Hey guys, welcome back. We are at week 43 of the 52 Sunday Dinners project, and here is what we'll be having this week. We are starting with grapefruit, then moving on to a roast young chicken with stuffing and gravy. We'll have that with Duchess potatoes, canned string beans. I had hoped to pick up some currant jelly maybe at a store to have it with this meal, but unfortunately where I'm at, I went to 2 or 3 grocery stores this time and none of them had it. But here is the recipe just in case some of you might want to try it for yourselves. We also are making nut bread, cinnamon apples, and of course, coffee. If this is your first time watching, thank you so much for being here. My name is Ashley. I'm a registered dietitian, and what we're doing today is part of the 52 Sunday Dinners project. I found this cookbook at an antique store a few months ago, and we decided to start this project in August so that we didn't have to wait until January. And so if you're going back and looking to see where the rest of these menus are, it starts at week 31 because we wanted to go along and do these menus in the time that they were meant to be done. In the 1920s, these menus were made with seasonality of ingredients as well as affordability in mind. Now, when we look at some of these menus, like I think in 2 weeks we'll be having mutton, you can certainly say that it does not translate 100 years later into the 2020s with economy in mind, as I believe that mutton, I could not find it anywhere here. We have traveled so many different places within hours of our home and nobody carries it. I do have to order that one online, and I believe that leg of mutton is going to be $200. So economy in mind back then is not the same as it is today. And with that, if you'd still like to follow along and watch us make all these different foods and try them out, we're gonna slap some aprons on. Come join us in the kitchen. Before we put the aprons on, you have to check out this skirt. Is this not the cutest thing ever? But wait. Is this not so adorable? These apples came from here on the property, and I don't think that they're Jonathan apples. I don't know that I've ever seen a Jonathan apple, or if I have, I wasn't aware that it was a Jonathan apple. But we're using what we have available to us, which is what they probably would have been doing back then anyway. And so here are our little apples. The color of this is so pretty. I don't know if it's picking it up on camera as much as it is in the light out here, but it's like this beautiful rose color. Yeah, that's how I would describe it. And it smells wonderful. There's 2 cups of liquid here, so we need 1 cup of sugar. When they said cinnamon drops, I thought that they meant something like Red Hots. And so I went to the grocery store looking for those, and I said earlier I'd only gone to a few grocery stores this time. The only thing I could find as far as cinnamon candies were these hot tamales. And so I picked those up, but at the very last second as I was going to check out, they had 1 bag of these cinnamon discs. These are the hard candies. And when I went to look further into, because I thought, well, those little cinnamon drops, the Red Hots, they're really small. If we need a dozen of them for this recipe, I was going to see how many grams a dozen of those would have been and measure that out in one of these candies. And when I looked it up, Red Hots weren't invented until the 1930s. So I then looked at what were cinnamon drops in the 1920s, and as far as I could ascertain based on Google, since I can't go back in time and double check with them, the drop candies were hard candies. So I think these will actually be the closest to what one of the cinnamon drops would have been back then. So we're going to use a dozen of those. This seems like a pretty interesting texture for a bread dough, but maybe it's not supposed to be a dough, maybe it's supposed to be a batter. We have measured everything correctly. So we're gonna let it rest, see if it rises up, and then we'll bake it. Now, I didn't mark the side of this to tell whether this has actually risen or not, but it's been a little over 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes, I'm not exactly sure. But we are going to go ahead and get it into the 2 loaf pans here and bake it. I have the temperature of the oven at 375, and we're just gonna bake these until I stick a toothpick in there and it comes out relatively clean. Maybe modern grapefruits have less of a core than the grapefruits would have 100 years ago, but there really isn't anything for me to take out here. So we're gonna loosen this pulp here, and I have shears. I'm not really sure what they mean by cut it in pieces. I don't know if they mean like loosen it in through here, or if they mean kind of chop all of it up within here. If some of you have something to weigh in about that, maybe that would be a really helpful learning experience for the rest of us. In the meantime, I'm gonna chop up a few little pieces here with my shears. I have washed and sanitized these, so don't you fret. Looking at this recipe, it talks about getting the chicken ready before it talks about cooking the liver, gizzards, and heart. The whole chickens that I have purchased before don't typically come with all of the innards, all of the organs. When I went to the next grocery store, they happen to have turkey soup pack necks, and it looks like the neck, the heart, the liver, and the gizzards in there. And so what I think we're going to do, and it might make it a little bit different, but today's chickens are also different than what 100 years ago chickens would have been. We're going to use the turkey innards, and I'll just save that neck for a soup. With this recipe, I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to stuff this chicken with the breadcrumbs and bake it and cook these organ meats separately for an hour and then chop them up and add them back into the chicken, or if this recipe is just a little bit out of the order that I am used to, and what I'm supposed to do is cook all of the organ meats first, chop them up, add them to the stuffing, and stuff the chicken from there. The organ meats maybe should be the first step before I start everything else. But that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go ahead, and I think I'm gonna make the call that we're going to cook the organ meats first and then start the rest of the chicken recipe after the organ meats have cooked. I hope that I'm right. If I'm not, I would really love it. You guys are great about educating the rest of us in the comments. So if I am wrong, let us know what I should have done down below, and that way whoever wants to try this recipe later can try it with your suggestions. All right, it's time to try everything, and so far, just like last week, I had said I think that menu put together is one of my favorites. This one too, the chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes, apples, everything here seems like it goes together pretty well. The only thing that's throwing me off a little bit with the menu and what I'm used to is starting this with grapefruit. And when I say it's throwing me off, it's just something that I wouldn't expect to put it together here, but it's a kind of a refreshing surprise. We've started most of our other meals so far with a soup or a broth. So to start this meal out with a citrus fruit seems really fun to me. The way I like to have grapefruit often is if I don't eat it just plain as a grapefruit, I like to sometimes put a little maple syrup or some brown sugar and broil it in the oven for a few minutes so it gets a nice, almost like creme brulee crust on it. It's delicious that way. But starting out a meal this way is wonderful as well. It's very nice and juicy and bright. It reminds me more of something that you would eat in the summertime for breakfast, but starting off a fall meal with a grapefruit, this is really fun. Let's carve a little piece off this chicken and see what she looks like inside. It smells really nice. Very juicy, it looks like. And let's get just a little bit of the skin in there to see how that tastes, and we'll get a little stuffing as well. Right up into the butt of this bird. Something that I'm excited about using in today's dinner is this little pitcher here. It's something that my great-grandmother used for her gravy back in the day, and I don't know if it was given to her from anyone or if she bought it new, but it could have been used in this time period in maybe the 20s or 30s to make a very similar meal and gravy. So it's kind of fun to think about how things come right back around. For the main course here, we have our chicken, our stuffing, our mashed potatoes, our green beans. So let's give it a little try here. It does smell really, really good. The chicken is nice and tender and juicy, not dry at all. I think adding all that grease to the outside really probably helped it, and basting it along the way. The gravy is very tasty. Let's give it a try with this stuffing. I know some of you are probably going to be very grossed out by the stuffing. Some of you will be very excited to see the organ meats inside of the stuffing. I've had venison heart before, and I don't know how much I really cared for it. I'm sure it was fine. I don't think it didn't stand out to me as being exceptional, good or bad. While I was staying with my friend Jenna, she made me beef tongue once, and I remember that being very good. I enjoyed that a lot. I don't remember, I know I've had liver, but I don't remember having it before. And most of the organ meats, I'm sure I'm not going to get a strong flavor of because it's blended in with all of these breadcrumbs and seasonings and butter. And I'm sure it will be kind of just an accent flavor in here, but let's give it a try. That's very good. I don't even know if I taste it that much. I might more feel the texture of it when chewing through than I actually taste it. I don't think I noticed the flavor of it very much. And the potatoes. Yeah, I think when I did the potatoes, it said to beat it until it was like a thick cream. And I did, and when I was piping it out, it seemed like maybe it was a little too thin. It didn't hold its shape like beautiful little baskets all the way around. It was more kind of like, I don't know. It got there, it held a shape, and then it just kind of blobbed out. And because of that, when I put the egg yolk and milk mixture on the top, it was hard to brush it on. It was more of a kind of pour over. If you can see here, you see a lot of that egg yolk just kind of sitting there on top, which isn't a bad thing. It just didn't brown as well as I had hoped that it would. Yeah, it tastes really nice. Something that with the green beans, the stuffing, the chicken, the mashed potatoes, this strikes me as a very American Sunday dinner meal. These things complement each other very well. Green beans and bacon, very familiar with. I think I'm struggling to find different descriptor words for these because all of it is something that I'm not unfamiliar with. These are all flavors that I'm used to eating on a semi-regular occasion, and so there's nothing standing out to me about any of it, and I don't say that in a bad way. All of this is very delicious. It's just not, I think it's something that's kind of commonplace for me, and so finding different aspects of it, about the texture, about the flavor, about the combination of things, nothing is really standing out for me because it's something that seems so standard, I think. So this menu, or some of those other menus here where we're at in America, like the suet pudding and Yorkshire puddings and some of those other things seem so different and something that maybe is not what we're used to here. Where this, I feel like I could put this plate down in front of most people that I know here and it wouldn't seem like anything but an ordinary menu. I almost forgot about the celery in the menu. I think we're supposed to just eat it like this. I know what celery tastes like. We've done celery on here before, but it's kind of a nice, very juicy. Again, I know I said the grapefruit was a refreshing start. We just had that heavy meal with the gravy and cooked green beans and mashed potatoes and stuffing and chicken. This is a nice, bright, crunchy, juicy way, I think, to break up that meal a little bit. This is, I kind of liking the celery break. And here are our cinnamon apples. They're not quite as crimson as I expected them to be. They're more of a pinkish color. And it's funny, in all of the other recipes where we have a sugar type of recipe and I'm supposed to cook it to a lighter amount, I end up turning it into taffy or hard candy. Now, this one, they wanted us to cook it until it was a syrup. And upon cooling, it should be jelly-like. And I really thought I was cooking it for a good long time. I thought it was going to be jelly-like enough, and I should have used my candy thermometer. I didn't this time. But this is what we are left with. Not quite jellied, but syrupy enough. It smells very strong of cinnamon. Let's see what they taste like. We have our whipped cream in there. It smells like apple and red hot cinnamon. You know, there's usually a difference. You can smell when it's a sugar cinnamon, like a sweet cinnamon, compared to a hot cinnamon, and this is definitely distinctively a hot cinnamon. These flavors go very well together. You definitely can pick up on the red hot cinnamon in here. It reminds me of chewing Big Red gum, which makes sense. I don't even know, is Big Red still a gum that people chew? I don't even know if that's still manufactured or not, but these things, it pairs really well together. Preferably, I'll be honest, when I first was reading this menu and saw cinnamon apples, I was so excited. I was picturing baking apples with cinnamon sugar around them and having maybe a baked cinnamon sugar apple. And I was a little disappointed when I saw that it was the red hot cinnamon candies with this. And then I think I was picturing like a candied apple where, you know, they dunk it in and there's that hard candy apple shell, and I really don't like those at all. But this is a nice balance between what you think of as a baked apple and that candied apple with that hard shell. The other thing I really liked about this recipe is that we cooked the cores and the skins, and it added a lot of nice apple flavor and the color from those skins into there. Last but not least is the nut bread. So we're gonna cut into this and see how that very wet batter turned out. The top of it, I mean, it seems very, I don't know if you can hear that. It seems like it's pretty nice and done and dry on the outside. It has a very hard crust on the outside here. Okay, it looks like very, oh, okay, I see. I was going to say it looks like it's extremely nutty, but it looks like all the nuts floated to the top maybe, and we are missing half of it. It looks like it's pretty wet down in there. It didn't quite form all the way. Actually, I kind of want to pull the whole thing out, and yes, that is precisely what's happening here. If you could see the bottom of this here and inside there, it does seem very, yes, it kind of feels like oatmeal or something down in there, very wet oatmeal. But we are still going to try it anyway. We'll get the wet bottom pieces. Something that I think I'm a little curious about with the currant jelly, it's listed in the menu next to the celery. So I'm wondering, would it have been just a condiment on the side, sort of like cranberry sauce? When we think of turkey, Thanksgiving turkey here in America, we have a cranberry sauce next to it. Would the currant jelly have been something like that we would have eaten our chicken with? Or would it have been something we ate on the celery? Or what seems most likely to me, although it's listed in a different level, and it doesn't say to serve it with the jelly, but I would think the nut bread would be where the currant jelly would be served with. But if you have any insight on that, go ahead and let us know about it. But let's give this a try here. We're gonna try the top first. And if you want to see kind of the texture of that going on there. Yeah, I'll try the hard top piece first. Now, the top is just having a mouthful of nuts. All the nuts floated to the top, and it's hard to kind of taste anything else in there. Let's try the middle then. The middle is much better, but still a very odd texture. The flavor's good. It tastes nutty. I really am enjoying everything we've made with this graham flour. The texture of the flour is really nice, but the texture of this bread is the top layer, of course, just the nuts. The middle layer there was it was wet and dry at the same time, almost like a sponge that didn't want to absorb the water that was sitting on it. I don't know how else to describe the texture of what that middle piece was. But let's try this bottom piece. The bottom part, it's very pliable. The flavor of the bottom is really good. It's just very wet and gloopy. I don't know how else to describe it, but I'd say the recipe for this nut bread, I think we did everything right. I'm pretty sure all of my measurements were correct. I am almost positive that the temperature and the time that we cooked it for was correct. So I would say just this nut bread recipe is not it for today's breads. What did I think about this recipe from a dietetic standpoint? First, with the addition of the organ meats in the stuffing, I really like that we made use of those. They add a good amount of protein where there wouldn't have been as much protein in that stuffing. So if you have maybe little kids that aren't into eating meat, but they like the carb type things, you know, they're going to go for the mashed potatoes, they're going to go for the stuffing. You can slip some of those organ meats into that stuffing and get them a little extra protein. The other really nice thing that you're going to find in there is vitamin A. Liver is very high in vitamin A. And within that stuffing and chicken, there was a good amount of fat so that our bodies can absorb the vitamin A in there. There's also a decent amount of iron in those organ meats. And so some of those vitamins and minerals that some of us struggle to get a little bit, we could be getting through those gizzards and livers and hearts instead of maybe through some other means, or instead of just not getting them at all. As we're talking about protein, chicken is an excellent source of protein, and not only that, it's a more affordable source than some other meats like the veals and the muttons and the pork chops and the beef and the steak. Chicken is on the more affordable end of that, especially when you're buying a whole chicken. I really like the way that we started this meal this time with a citrus fruit. And the grapefruit isn't the only fruit that we had in this meal. We had, to start with, a nice high in vitamin C citrus fruit, and then we ended the meal with apples. And in between those, we also had green beans and celery. We had a couple different types of vegetables. While the green beans were cooked, the celery was raw. We had different forms of it. And the same thing with the fruit. We had a raw grapefruit at the beginning and then baked apples at the end. If it would have turned out correctly, the nut bread with the type of flour that we use, that graham flour, you have more of the protein and fiber in there. If we would have had the currant jelly, there would have been another source of fruit in there. Although I know it would have had a lot of sugar added to it, it would have been a jelly. There's still a lot of great nutrients that could have been gained from that. The one thing that I wasn't a huge fan of, and I know it affects different people differently, but as this would have served little children, and some of us are sensitive to it, that maraschino cherry at the beginning, if that would have been eaten or somebody was eating everybody else's cherries, and the apples, there was more red food dye than what I expected in this meal. And while it wasn't a lot, just a little bit from that cherry and a little bit in those cinnamon candies. If I were making this again today and I wanted to modernize that recipe, I might have just omitted the cherry and the grapefruit and maybe used a cinnamon oil instead of those candies. Overall, I think this menu complemented itself very well. As I mentioned earlier about those apples and how I wish that they would have been the baked apples with cinnamon and sugar, we're actually going to be making those next week. So if you liked what you saw today, please make sure to tune in next week where we make those cinnamon sugar apples in addition to Scotch broth and Washington pie. Oh yes, I really love the menu. No, I thought it was terrible. No, it was delicious. It was making me so happy. No, it was so terrible. Ugh.